Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the January 2023 edition of the St. Louis Java Users Group. For those who don't know, the St. Louis Java Users Group is an informal group. Attendance is free. There's no formal membership list. The normal meeting date is the second Thursday of each month except December, when there is no meeting. When we meet in person, you can join us for food and social at 6 p.m., and the meeting will start at 6:30 p.m. When we meet in person, our normal meeting location is the Object Computing Incorporated Training Room at 12,140 Woodcrest Executive Drive, Suite 310, and that's in St. Louis, Missouri. I'd like to introduce the other members of the St. Louis Java Users Group Steering Committee. So from left to right, we have Ted Doyle, Todd Zimmerman, Bruce Alspo, that's me in the middle, Wei-Chi Gao, and Kathy Zwang. You can reach all of us on the steering committee by sending a message to that email address at the bottom of your screen. That's javasigsc@ociweb.com. The St. Louis Java Users Group would not be possible without the support of our sponsors, so I have their logos up. Object Computing Incorporated is our founding sponsor, and they were with us from the beginning in 1997, and they have been able to fill in whenever we needed help all along the way. JFrog has also been a fantastic sponsor as well. They sponsor the fees for the Meetup group, and they also sponsor the Zoom account, which makes these remote meetings possible. And on occasion, they'll come in and sponsor some raffle prizes as well. So thank you to JFrog. Signature Consultants and Adaptive Solutions Group are headhunters. So if you are looking for a Java position, or if you have a position that you need to fill, you could talk to either one of them and let them know that you heard about them through the St. Louis Java Users Group. I'm sure they would appreciate that. And when we meet in person, they sponsor the food, but we haven't figured out how to send the pizza over the internet yet. At the end of the meeting, we will be raffling some door prizes, and you must be present to win for those. So if you're watching the recording, I'm sorry you're too late. But we will have this time 4 JetBrains licenses for any JetBrains desktop product of your choice. So if you just stick through to the end, you'll be able to participate in that raffle. Elastic has some search capabilities that they make possible, and they have sponsored some gift cards, and as soon as we're back to meeting in person, we will raffle those as well. Intertech is a training company, and they have great online training courses, and they sponsor the famous Screaming Flying Monkeys, mouse pads, coffee cups, and so forth. So if you're looking to increase your Java skills, or really any of your software development skills, just do a quick Google search for Intertech, and you'll find a lot of great training there. At the end of the meeting, we'll also be raffling 2 Manning e-books of your choice. And again, you must be present to win for those. So thank you to Manning for that. And Pearson will on occasion sponsor some physical books as well, which we have been known to raffle. So thank you to all of our sponsors for making the Java Users Group possible. As far as announcements go, the Gateway Software Symposium is coming up. Now that will be March 31st through April 1st in St. Louis. If you want the details, just go to that URL there that's on the screen. That's nofluffjuststuff.com/St. Louis. And they've been nice enough to offer a JUG discount code. So if you'd like to attend, and I believe that's either virtually or in person, you can use that discount code to get a $100 discount on your registration. And I believe we will be raffling a Gateway Software Symposium ticket at our next meeting in February. And I'd like to thank Jay Zimmerman for allowing us to do that. DevNexus 2023 is also coming up. That will be April 4th through the 6th in Atlanta, Georgia. They are one of the largest Java conferences, I should say, in North America. And I've been going to that, and yeah, I admit it, I go there and I'm there to steal great speakers. If you'd like to learn more about that conference, just go to their website. That's devnexus.com there on your screen. As far as upcoming presentations go, on February 9th, we will have Not Your Father's Java, Not Your Mother's JavaScript by Dmitry Chuko. Oh boy, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, of Bellsoft. And Bellsoft is one of the committers to OpenJDK. And he'll be comparing what's in common between Java and JavaScript. You can go ahead and RSVP for that meeting. It's already posted on Meetup right now. So if you'd like to keep up with the presentations, as soon as we get them scheduled, we post them on our Meetup site. That's meetup.com/gatewayjug. And as long as you're in Meetup, you'll get the notifications as soon as we post something or make any changes to the presentation schedule, and you can RSVP there as well. If you are interested in giving a presentation or sponsoring a jug, or would like to, there's a presentation that you would like to see, again, you can email us on the steering committee at that email address there on your screen. That's javasigsc@ociweb.com. So those are my announcements for tonight. And tonight's speaker is Craig Walls of VMware, who will be talking about the Talking App, an introduction to developing Alexa skills. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that Craig can go ahead and share his screen, and you can take it away and tell us about Alexa.
All right, let me make sure everything's sharing and that I see the things I'm supposed to see on my screen.
Yes, you seem to be sharing just fine. I'm able to see you.
All right. So can you see my opening slide?
Yes, it says the Talking App.
Perfect. Okay, great. All right, so yeah, that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about how to build voice experiences specifically for Amazon Alexa. This is who I am. This is where you can follow me on Twitter or Mastodon, and also where you can email me should you have any questions. So of course, the best time to ask a question is during the meeting. I'm going to have a little bit of trouble following the chat. So if I don't answer your question right away, or if we wait until maybe a Q&A session to get around to it, I'm sorry about that. It's just a little tricky when you're doing it virtually on Zoom to both present a talk and monitor the chat. So I'll do my best. But if for whatever reason you don't get your question in, or maybe you don't even think of the question until after this is over, feel free to email me and I'll try to get back to you. All right, with that said, I'm going to tell a little bit of story. I'm going to tell a little bit about myself. And it's not because I like to talk about myself too much. And I certainly don't usually have a about the speaker slide or set of slides in most of my presentations. But for this, I wanted to tell a very specific story that pertains to what we're talking about tonight, just kind of lead you into where we're going. First off, I've been developing Java for a very, very long time. I've been developing Java in Java since it was 1.0.2. I wrote applets where you'd have Duke tumble across the screen. And since then, I've been doing all sorts of other things that don't involve applets with Java. And I'm proud to say that I was elected as a Java champion in 2021. And so it's kind of exciting time to be a Java developer these days with all the stuff going on in the Java world. And I'm happy to be part of the Champions program. I'm also a member of the Spring engineering team. Why is it not going? There we go. I'm a member of the Spring engineering team. And even before I was a member of the Spring engineering team, I developed in Spring. I worked on several projects for other companies developing Spring. And I've been working with Spring since version 0.9, before most people even knew what it was. And I wrote a set of books about Spring, and I'll talk about those a little bit more later. But if you're not familiar with them, Spring in Action, Spring Boot in Action, and a couple of other things that had Spring involved that I wrote. And so I'm definitely a Spring developer. And I say that largely to say this. Even though I'm going to be talking about Alexa primarily tonight, it doesn't mean that I've abandoned Spring. I've had people question my loyalties to Java and Spring, even though I'm doing other things as well. No, it's not that at all. I love Spring. Very happy to be a member of that team. And I'm just find other things interesting as well. And since 1998, or 1998, that's wrong, 2018, let's get the years right. I'm not Y2K compliant. Since 2018, I've been developing for Alexa. And it all started just because I was interested and curious and thought I'd tinker with it, and then something else happened. But let's go further back. Let's go back even further than when I started working with Java. In the early days, when I was a very young kid, I was fascinated, always been a big fan of science fiction. And all sorts of science fiction, Star Trek, Lost in Space, Star Wars, whatever it be. And as I got older, I even started reading some of the works of Isaac Asimov. I started watching of course, the newer Star Trek series, and even more recently, stuff in the MCU, which I guess is a sort of science fiction. But a common theme in all of that was that computers talked. Humans interacted with computers by talking to them. Now, if you'll remember the enterprise computer, they definitely talked to the enterprise computer, but they still touched it. They still had control panels and they did things with it. But a lot of times they could talk to the computer. And in fact, it's really interesting if you talk to some of the people who kind of started the whole Alexa movement at Amazon. One of their whole driving forces was to offer the same experience that the enterprise computer would give you. That was some of their inspiration. And so the enterprise computer, robot on Lost in Space, Kit on Knight Rider, things like that. These are all computers that people could talk to. And so as a kid, I was very fascinated with this idea that I could talk to a machine and have it do things for me or answer questions for me. But the problem was I got a real computer. And this is actually it's on a picture of my VIC-20, but it was a Commodore VIC-20 was my first computer. And the Commodore VIC-20 was very disappointing in many ways. It had 23 columns on it, which is a very odd, bizarre number to have as the column size. Very weird computer. But the one thing I noted about it is it didn't talk. And so it's a little bit, disheartening. It wasn't too long after that, I got a Commodore 64, and guess what? It didn't talk either. And it had 40 columns now, and there was some hacks that people made to give it 80 columns, but it was really just still 40 columns with some trickery to make it look like it was 80. But again, computer did not talk. All I could do was type at these computers. I could not talk to them, and they certainly wouldn't talk back. That's a bummer. Now, there is one thing, one exception to this rule. There was a game. I never owned this game. There's a game that came out back then called Echelon. I remember seeing ads for it in the different computer magazines like Ahoy and Computes Gazette. I remember seeing ads for this, and it came with this thing called a lipstick, which you kind of see in the picture there at the bottom. It's just basically a headset with a microphone. And the ads for Echelon made you think you could talk to the game. That's how you controlled the game. And that sounded really cool to me, and I never got the game. And as a kid, I was disappointed that I never got this game. In hindsight, though, I'm kind of glad I didn't waste my money or my parents' money on this, because I've learned that since then that the lipstick was really nothing more than a voice-triggered fire button that you would say fire into it and it would fire, but you still controlled your ship or whatever with a joystick. And to make things worse, it didn't even listen for the word fire. It would actually fire if you made any noise into that lipstick. If you just went psst, it would fire. So it really wasn't voice. It wasn't voice capable at all. It was quite a disappointment. And so a long time went by, and I early in the early 2000s, I took some interest in some of these voice specifications that had come out, and they were interesting to me, and I studied them. Unfortunately, I did not have the budget for the hardware required to actually do anything meaningful with them. And that's probably okay, because I probably wouldn't have been able to do much with those anyway. They were probably very limited in their scope. But it was very disappointing that for the longest amount of time, there was nothing I could do to talk to a computer. And yet I stuck with it. I still develop software and I still enjoy it. But I've always wondered, what could happen if I could talk to my computer instead of just typing at it. And it wasn't until Siri came along. And when Siri came along on my phone, I thought, well, this is cool. I can finally talk to it. And I'm sure, like many people, you were excited when you got Siri and you could talk to it and you could say weird things to it and ask it to tell jokes, and you'd have a lot of fun with it. But as a developer, at the end of the day, you still were disappointed because there's only, at the time, there's nothing you could really do to customize Siri and to give it create applications around it. And even now, even though Apple has made available some SDKs to work with Siri, they're really nothing more than features of a regular iOS app, which is cool on its own. I mean, when you think about it, it's still cool that we can talk to our app that way, but it's very much tethered to an iOS experience. And so Siri left me really wanting, and it kind of still does. That's a bummer. But then something else happened. Alexa came along, and that was exciting. It was very exciting when I first heard about it, but at the same time, I'd been so burned and so disillusioned by the inability to speak with computers that when Alexa came along, I was just, maybe I'll try this out someday, because I was already under the impression that it wasn't going to be any good. I was already disappointed with it. But then I had an opportunity. I had an opportunity to work on an Alexa skill. There was a hackathon that Amazon was offering, and they really basically said, you just deploy any skill. It doesn't even have to do anything fancy. Just if you're one of the first so many people who publish a skill for Alexa, we'll send you a free Echo Dot. And I thought, yeah, sure, why not? Give me a chance to learn something, and I won't turn down free hardware. And so I gave it a shot, and I was hooked. It was fun. And it wasn't long after that, because I was hooked. And this is brilliant. They gave me a free Echo Dot, which on their part was probably cost them virtually nothing. And in turn, I turned around and sent them tons of money because I started adding all sorts of devices. So here's the Echo Dot that they sent me. And since then, I've picked up a few other devices. And these are actual pictures of my own devices that I have scattered all through my house. And a few of these, I have 2 or 3 versions of them, 2 or 3 instances of those things scattered through the house. And it's been exciting both as a consumer and as a developer to develop for these things. Now, this is where I would probably stop and go into, okay, well, how do you develop for these things? But I want to finish telling the story a little bit, because last week when I was in Sandusky, Ohio for CodeMash, I gave a presentation on developing mobile experiences for Alexa. And I'll go ahead and finish telling that story. Is all of these devices I showed on the previous screen have one problem. And in case you can't see it, let me help you a little bit. You're tethered to a wall socket. Whether you're at the office or whether you're at home, you just can't go out with these things. If you want to talk to Alexa, you have to be near a wall plug. Except that's not what I wanted. That's not what the enterprise computer would give me. I could talk to the enterprise computer or if I was, a crew of the enterprise, I could speak with the enterprise computer by talking on my communicator to the computer. I didn't have to stay on the ship to talk to it. And so Alexa had this, or Amazon had this kind of promotion, this sort of motto of sorts a few years ago. And in fact, I have a t-shirt and a hoodie that say this, have this design on it, and it says Alexa everywhere. And it made me wonder if I have to plug it in, can I really truly take Alexa everywhere? Can I take Alexa to the store? Can I take Alexa to the park? Can I take Alexa in the car with me? And it hasn't been until recent years, and in fact, the last year or two, that you can truly take Alexa with you. And so not going to cover much of the mobile stuff tonight, but I wanted to just give you a teaser for that stuff, that Alexa can, in fact, be everywhere. In fact, late last year, Alexa went somewhere that none of us have ever gone. Alexa rode on the Orion spacecraft, part of the Artemis mission, and went on a trip around the moon. And Alexa was on that spacecraft. So if Alexa can go on a spacecraft around the moon, then why couldn't it go to the store with you? Why couldn't it solve whatever problems you're trying to solve? And so this is these are all reasons that I'm excited about developing for voice. And I'm going to show you how some of this stuff works here in a minute. But before I do, let's talk about why you should be excited about voice. And if this was a live audience, I'd probably take a show of hands and see if anybody wanted to give any answers of why you might be excited about voice. You're welcome to put some of those in the chat, and I'll read through them here in a minute. But for now, I'm just going to give you a few of the reasons I think you should be excited. First off, it's just another UI. It's no different. It sits in the stack in the very same position as many of the JavaScript frameworks that we build for web browsers, things like React or Angular or Vue. It sits in that same place. It's just another UI. And so you can have whatever you want in the background, whatever application you need in the background to do the real serious business logic. We could have this UI. And the difference is that it's not just a thing that users click on, it's something they can talk to. And that's kind of the point, is it's not just another UI. It sits in the same place in the stack, but it's different. It gives you the ability to do things that you can't do when you click on it. And in fact, because it's not just another UI, the way you would design for it's a little bit different. You have to think about how people might interact with your app if they're talking to it, which is probably different than how you click on it. And one of the things you would think about is, if I'm going to build a voice application, what's going to make people want to use it more than just tapping on their phone? And the answer to that is really simple. Do something that they can't do if they're tapping on their phone, and offer them something that is more convenient. And I'll give you an example of this. I'm a big fan of Disney parks. Me and my family, we go to Disneyland, Disney World all the time. And one of the things I like to know when I'm in the Disney park, and sometimes when I'm not in a Disney park, is I want to know how long the line is for a certain attraction. How long is the line for Pirates of the Caribbean? Or how long is the line for Haunted Mansion? And I've tried this with the Disney apps. And if I open their apps up, it takes me, by the time I've unlocked my phone and I've opened the app and I've tapped through to get to the point where I know what the wait time is for any attraction, it's at least 4 taps and possibly as many as 6 or 7, depending on whether I'm logged into the app or not. And yet, if I have a voice experience for that, and in fact, I have built just such a thing, if I have a voice experience for it, I can just ask, how long is the wait for Pirates of the Caribbean? And it can answer me. It's more convenient in some cases. Also, you got to consider accessibility. There are some people who struggle with, they're differently able. They are not able to necessarily just as easily tap on something or see something as some other people, but they can certainly talk and listen. And so it offers a form of accessibility. And one of the things I learned a few years ago, sitting in on a session, in fact, the session was at DevNexus that was advertised earlier. And it was a friend of mine, Scott Davis, was presenting this. And if you go look out there online, he has videos of this same session that he's recorded at different locations. But it's talking about accessibility. And one of the things he said in there that I thought was really cool is, whether or not you have a different ability or different limitations, everybody at some point is going to have a disability of some sort. It may be when your hands are full, you're walking in the door with the groceries. Maybe it's when you're working on your car and your hands are busy in the engine. Maybe it's around Thanksgiving and your hands are all preparing a turkey, and it's not really a good time for you to take your hand with the turkey juice on it and start tapping on things. And yet you can still talk to things during those circumstances. You still work with your applications and interact with different UIs by just simply talking to them at that time. Also, it's just fun. And I got to tell you, I love what I do working with Spring. I love some of the problems just today, some of the problems I was dealing with Spring and Kubernetes. It was a fun time, but never have I done anything more fun than developing for voice. It's just something else. And I think part of the reason for that is it matches up with that. How does this make my life more like Star Trek? How do I build voice apps? How do I do these things that were science fiction until recently? How can I do that? And that's what makes it a ton of fun. It's also worth noting, it can be profitable. There are folks out there who are making some pretty good money developing voice experiences. And one example that comes to mind immediately, it's the one that comes to mind always when I think of people who are making money doing this, is a man named, totally forgetting his first name now. His last name is Schwab. I wanted to say some other name, but I know that's not him. Nick, his name is Nick Schwab. Nick Schwab has actually had articles written on him in different periodicals. I know I saw an article about him on CNN, and I think there was an article about him in Forbes or Wall Street Journal or something. And Nick Schwab created this Alexa skill, and he ended up, adding some, where you can, extra paid experiences, micro payments, like little add-ons and stuff. He started adding those on there. And since he did that, he had made so much money that he had left his original job and started his own company to develop voice apps. And he bought almost directly out of the money he made from that skill, he bought a Tesla. And that's been several years ago. He traded in that Tesla and got a new Tesla. And more recently, he has sent back that Tesla because it decided to drive for him and almost got him in an accident. That's a whole different story. But never mind that. The fact that he was able to quit his job, start a whole nother company, and buy himself a pretty expensive car just because he developed a voice app. It's kind of cool. It's kind of inspiring. Makes you kind of wonder how you could make some money doing the same kind of thing. Now, you may be wondering, okay, what did Nick do? What amazing Alexa skill did he build? And the answer is it's really kind of almost embarrassing that nobody else beat him to it. It's called sleep sounds. It basically plays ambient sounds while you sleep. That's it. Now, they're good quality sounds. There's nothing, I mean, he didn't really cheap out on it, but the actual coding required to build that is pretty straightforward. I pretty much could recreate it myself. I wouldn't probably have as good sounds as he has, but I could definitely recreate the experience. And so it's just really interesting that doing something as simple as that, Nick has done so well for himself. So yeah, it could be profitable. Now, I'm about to go into the live coding part of the talk. And but let me give you a few options up front, a few of the things you have up front as options. So I know this is a Java user group, and therefore it's worth talking about what our options are, whether Java is part of this or not. And the truth is, you can use Node.js, you can use Python, or you can use Java. Those are the three main supported options when you're developing for Alexa. But the truth is, any language that you can deploy as a function in AWS Lambda, or any language in which you can deploy on any hosting of your choice, and it handle post requests from Amazon, that can also work with Alexa. You can use that as a backend. Now, that said, you're getting off kind of the beaten path the further you go down this list. And if you are hosting it on your own hardware somewhere, that's fine. If you are building it, if you wanted to build an Alexa skill in C# or in Go, you can certainly do that. It's just at that point, you're a little bit on your own doing it. You're kind of building your own frameworks to do that. There is no official SDK for it in those languages. I do know of someone who has built a C# SDK or a .NET SDK for developing Alexa, but it's not officially supported by Amazon. So you're kind of, in the wild, wild west when you're doing that. Now, if there's an option we're going to talk about here in a minute called Alexa hosting, and you have several different choices for hosting your skill, whether you use any of these languages or not. But one of those is called Alexa hosted. and it's free up to a point, and it's actually a pretty convenient choice to make if you're especially if you're new to working with Alexa. And if you're using Alexa hosted skills, Java is simply not an option, just isn't. And there's good reason for it, but part of the reason has to do with up until recently, Java has been a little bit slow to start in AWS Lambda. And behind Alexa hosted skills, you still are deploying to AWS Lambda. Now, there's this new thing that they announced here not too long ago called Snap Start that is making all that different. And so Java will be able to start up much quicker on Lambda. But even so, the development community has not really embraced Java as a good option for developing for Alexa. And as a consequence, the resources, the tooling, the libraries, testing support, things like that are just a little bit less for Java, unfortunately. Now, that said, this is my chance to give you an invitation. Change that. As members of the Java community, if you're interested in enabling a greater, more rich development experience with Java for Alexa, change that. Go out there and develop some of the tools that may already exist readily for Node and Python, develop them for Java. Make that a better world for Java developers. That's your invitation. But tonight, for tonight's purposes, I'm going to develop most of what I do in Node. Not knocking Python at all. It's just Node felt more natural to me. And after all, I heard from a recruiter somewhere that JavaScript and Java are basically the same thing anyway. So, it's a joke. Okay, it's a joke. I know that's probably a little sensitive to some people, but I'm going to develop in Node. And there's going to be a little bit of Java at one point in this. In fact, I got a Spring app that's going to be sitting behind some of this. I'm going to show you how I do that as well. But I'm going to develop most of this in Node. Just heads up in case that freaks anybody out. So let's go ahead and let's create a voice experience. And let's create a simple, I don't even know why I have an on there. Let's create a simple voice experience. I don't know what's going on with my marks there. I need to fix that, but we're going to not do anything fancy. We're going to keep it fairly simple, although it's going to be a little bit more interesting than Hello World. It's not going to be a full-blown voice experience because we just don't have the time. But what we're going to do is we are going to start off with essentially a Hello World skill. We're going to try that out. We're going to do things like handle some variable input and see how the user can specify certain things when they speak as parameters to the skill. We're going to talk about some integration with backends, and that'll include some Java code and some Spring code. We're going to talk about some testing, and we're going to talk about whatever else I can fit in the time we have. What we're not going to do, there's actually a lot. There's so much. There's more than I could even fit on this slide reasonably to talk that we could talk about that we just aren't going to have time for. But just so you're aware of it, you can develop visual elements for screen devices. So along with your voice experience, we like to speak of Alexa as not as voice first, but that's not to say it's voice only. If someone has an Echo Show, if somebody has a Fire TV, they could still talk to your Alexa app, or your Alexa skill, and see some visual elements as well. And things like the Echo Shows, those are touch screens. So you can actually develop, touchscreen experiences along with the voice. We're not going to talk about location awareness, although quite honestly, that is one of my favorite subjects to talk about. That's what I presented on last week at CodeMash. But we're just not going to have the time for that. We're not going to be able to get around to that tonight. We're not going to talk about dialogues. I'm going to talk a little bit in this session about how to capture input from the user as parameters. But when you have multiple bits of input you're trying to gather, dialogues are a great way to kind of guide the user in asking for what you need before you start processing the data. So if the user says, for example, I want to book a trip, then it can start asking questions like, okay, where do you want to go? And when do you want to leave? And when do you want to return? And these types of things can guide the user to answer questions. You can kind of think about them a little bit like wizards in a UI app, but they're more like voice wizards. A dialogue will ask questions to kind of fill in the blanks until it has enough information to actually go process whatever it's trying to do. There's also a kind of a thing that's similar to dialogues, and it's actually a lot more powerful, it's a little bit more complicated as well. It's called Conversations, and it's driven by AI. You basically define several different scripts, essentially, of conversations between the user and Alexa. You run it through this AI processing, and as a result, it comes out with these conversations that are still very much like dialogues. It guides the user to filling in the blanks. The thing about conversations, they're cool. They're really cool. They are challenging to do in a presentation for no other reason than once you've defined your conversation model, it takes anywhere from 20 minutes or longer for it to be run through the AI engine to produce the actual running code. So it takes a while. So therefore, I'm not going to cover those tonight. We're not going to talk about making money with Alexa, other than to say that there are several options for that. The most simple option is you can offer products at Amazon sales in your skill. And if people choose to buy them, you essentially get some sort of commissions. It's exactly the same way. If you're familiar with Amazon Associates program, it's exactly the same as that. There's also things like in-skill purchases, where you can offer capabilities for your skill that are free, but then you can also have them upgrade and offer additional capabilities that aren't there for free. And so maybe they'll pay 99 cents to enable some feature that wasn't there before. And there's other ways to make money with Alexa as well. We're just not going to have time to cover that tonight. And there's about a billion other subjects as well. It's a very rich set of stuff you can do with Alexa. But we're going to focus on the basics tonight, because that's, I believe, what the title was, something about getting started or an introduction to developing for Alexa. So that's what we're going to do. So now let's build that voice app. But one more thing, because I want to close my slides. I want to get rid of them. They're in my way. I don't want to look at them anymore. So I have one more slide to show you, and that's this slide. It's the slide that everybody likes to have at the end. I'm just going to do it now so I can close my slides. Thank you. I'm glad you came. I hope you enjoy what we're about to do. Here's all the same information about me. And oh yeah, check out my books. That book on the left there, that is a book about what we're going to talk about tonight. And the book on the right, that's a book on spring, developing for spring. And I'm not sure if I'm supposed to tell you this or not, because the information I'm about to tell you is specifically for CodeMash attendees, but I didn't take it out of my slides. So I'm going to go ahead and put it up there anyway. Take a screenshot right now. I believe that these CodeMash discount codes are still good. So if you were to go to pragprog.com and use WalsMash23, I think that's good until the end of January. You'll get 30% off my ebook. Or if you go to Manning.com, you can either get a print or ebook with CTW CodeMash 23. So again, I'm pretty sure that the Prague one is good until the end of January. I'm not sure about the Manning one, but I think it's still good. So hurry, take advantage of that. So I'm going to leave this on the screen long enough for you to take a screenshot. So going away in 3, 2, 1. All right. Let me close that out. Let me get a few things set up for what we're about to do. Oh, I guess that window's already there. That was awful convenient. All right, so let's build a skill. So there's a couple of ways you can start developing a skill. One of those ways is, and I'll pop up my Chrome window and show you what some people do. I personally don't care for this option. But if you go to developer.amazon.com and you go register for an account, I'm not going to show you how to do that, but go register for a developer account. And this is different than an AWS account, by the way. This is an Amazon developer account. Go register for that account. And then you'll come in here under Alexa and you'll go to oops, I got a little greedy with my clicks there. I'm going to go to Developer Console. And here in Developer Console, you can click a button called Create Skill, and you can create a skill, and you can actually do most, if not all, of your development right here in the browser. But I hate that. That's not my way of doing things. I may do a few small little tweaks here and there in the browser, or something quick and dirty, but I prefer not using the browser. So I'm not going to show you that way. Let's move that out of the way. I'm going to show you another option you have. If you have Visual Studio Code, and let's wait for it. Always afraid that it's going to bring up another project I was working on earlier, so kind of ignore that for now. The main thing is wait for it to start up. notice over here, I have this thing called the Ask or the Alexa Skills Kit SDK extension for VS Code. You can go add that the same way you'd add any extension in VS Code. You go down here to extensions, go search for it and add it. But once you've added it, once you've logged into your Alexa developer account through it, then you can do things like create a new skill. Or if you go to this tab, you can create a new skill. You can import an existing skill. You can do things like that. You can even test stuff here. This is another way to do it. I've actually done this a few times, but for some reason, and it's not that bad, but for some reason, it just feels wrong. I'm more of the command line kind of guy. And so what I like to do is I have this tool, this command line tool called the Ask CLI. Now, if you're wondering what Ask stands for, it's Alexa Skills Kit. That's the name of the SDK. So I have this command called Ask, and it gives me all sorts of things I can do. There's actually, you don't see them there, but there's actually like hundreds of things you can do. Most of them are under this subcommand called SMAPI, which we're definitely not going to talk about tonight. There's a lot, that's a whole can of worms. We're just not going to have time. But with Ask, you install the Ask CLI, you set it up. There's some initialization steps you have to set up. Mostly it involves logging in with your Amazon developer account, or your Amazon developer account, and optionally, depending on how you're going to deploy your skills, your AWS account. But I've already done all that, so I'm not going to do that in front of you. It's pretty straightforward to do, though. What I'm going to do is I've got this nice empty directory here. As you can see, there's not a thing in it. And I'm going to say ask new, and that's going to ask me some questions. And the first question it's going to ask me is, what language am I going to work in? Node, Python, or Java? Now, I could use Java. In fact, on YouTube, I don't have the link to my YouTube channel handy right now, but I'll share it with Bruce or somebody, and maybe they could share it and send it out to everybody when they make my slides and otherwise other code available. But on my YouTube channel recently, I did publish a video that shows exactly how to build a Java app this way. You know, if you wanted to do what I'm about to do, but do it in Java, I show how to do that. Ultimately, the experience isn't that different other than the language you choose, though. So I'm going to pick Node, and you have several options for hosting. And I'm going to start at the bottom and work my way up. You can self-host. That's if you want to, throw it out on some other server you have out on the internet, or maybe some other cloud provider that's not AWS. You can certainly self-host there. The thing is that your code will need to handle post requests that come from Amazon, and internally, it's going to be, the request is going to have a token in it that you're going to have to verify and make sure that the token is good. Otherwise, you should ignore the request. You should send an error back. I've done that kind of thing before. It's interesting, but most of the time you're not going to want to do that, especially if you're new to working with Alexa. You also have the AWS Lambda option. Now, in this option, you're deploying directly to Lambda in your own AWS account. So whatever arrangements you have with AWS, that's where you're deploying it. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's the way that I started off working with this. And it's, even with AWS Lambda, it's free up to a point. As long as you're not getting a ton of traffic, it's free. You can do a lot with that without paying a dime to Amazon. And for what it's worth, I've never paid a dime to Amazon other than buying a bunch of hardware that I talked about earlier. So you can do a lot of this for free. If you want to do a more complex deployment to Lambda, then you would use AWS with CloudFormation. That way you can use some of the AWS services and other things. We're going to keep it simple tonight, so that's not even a good option. Or Alexa hosted skills. And this one is hosted by Alexa. It is hosted in Lambda, just like AWS Lambda is. The difference is it's not hosted in your Lambda space. It's not counting against your Lambda metrics or any of your AWS thresholds or anything before you start paying. Instead, this is separate. They create a whole separate space in Lambda that the Alexa part of the organization is paying for, and you can host your skill there for free. And that's fine up to a point. There is a limit. I can't remember what the limit is, but if you actually hit that limit, that's a kind of a good kind of problem to have. You might want to start talking about some of that making money with your skill if you actually hit that limit, because if your skill is that popular, then you have a potential for making a lot of money. And I could talk about, I don't know enough about it to talk about it intelligently, but there is a program at Amazon, where if it hasn't started up yet, I think it's starting up soon, where they will throw money at you for doing nothing more than producing high quality skills. That's about all I can say about it, but just keep an eye out for that. I'm going to choose Alexa hosted skills. It's a great way to get started. It's easy. Cleanup's easy. So with AWS Lambda, if I decide I don't want to do, if I start creating a skill and I decide, now that was crap, let's start over, and I delete it, then I have to go delete Lambda. I have to go delete stuff in CloudWatch. I have to go clean up everything. With do it in Alexa hosted skills, it's all their problem. It's not my problem. Of course, you have to choose a region, and everybody uses US East 1, but of course, pick the one that's most appropriate for your needs. And then we're going to have to give it a name. What's the name I wanted to give this? I wanted to call this one Home Field. And you'll see why a little bit later. We're going to call it Home Field. And it's going to ask for a directory where I want this project to be created at. And you wait a few seconds. It says it'll take about a minute, and that's pretty accurate. My experience has shown that when people are watching me do this, it seems to take a lot longer, but it takes about a minute. And what it's doing right now is it's actually cloning a kind of a template project, a kind of a getting started Hello World template project. It's cloning that project. It's making a copy of it for me, cloning it to my local machine. It's actually pushing it out into AWS Lambda. Some of the initial code is going to be pushed out there for me. It's creating a interaction model for me. It's doing a few other things. That's why it takes a few minutes to kind of get all this set up. But once it's here, I'll be able to open this up and we can get to work on it. So sorry for the dead space, but this gives me a great opportunity to get a drink because my throat's getting a little scratchy. All right, I gotta think it's gotta be done pretty soon. Yeah, like I said, when people watch me, it usually takes a lot longer. There, it's almost done. I see it's almost done. So it's cloning it to my local machine. And let's go ahead and go into home field. I'm gonna clear that and we'll take a quick look. First off, get status. Notice there's already a few things that have changed. It's oddly enough, I sort of know why it did this, but it basically created a copy of my skill, it cloned it for me, and then it started tweaking and adding files for me. So those files are not yet committed. And it's kind of important to notice that this thing called skill package, that's where my interaction model lives, as well as a few other things. That hasn't been, that's new. It's been created by the Ask CLI since it was cloned. And so in a minute, when I get around to deploying this, it's going to take a little bit longer that first time, because that first time it's going to have to go build that interaction model for me. And it takes a little bit longer. After that, it goes a little bit faster, but the first time it takes a little bit longer. So let's go ahead and open this up and start taking a look at what we have. So I'm going to pull my VS Code window over here, which should be opening up about now. I'm going to close my other VS Code window I had open earlier. All right, so there's a lot of things to look at in here in this project. I'll zoom in a little bit so we can see what's all over here. Ask resources. This is not interesting for the most part. It's just telling it. It's essentially it has some stuff in here. Ignore that. Essentially, it has some stuff in here that tells it that this is an Alexa hosted skill. You probably will never touch that. Of course, there's get ignore, which has things that you don't want to check in. There's .ask. Now, this is kind of an important one. This is when you get around to deploying, among other things, this is where the kind of deployment will live momentarily before it pushes out to AWS Lambda. The file that's most important to you in here is ask states. And there's a lot of ways you can get this information that without looking at this file, but this is a very convenient place to know what your skill ID is. So if you're ever needing to know what the skill ID is, you can find it under .ask and then ask states.json, it'll tell you. There's other ways to find out, but that's like one of the most obvious, quickest ways to find it. Most of the time you don't need to know that, but occasionally you run across a command, or maybe if you're dealing with support or something. And by the way, if you're ever needing any questions about developing for Alexa, go to alexa.design/Slack. They have a Slack board out there. Tons of people out there ready to answer your questions. Many of them work for Amazon, and then many of them don't. I'm out there. I answer a lot of questions out there. Some of the Amazon developers are out there answering questions, but sometimes they get stuck and they may want to, especially if it's somebody internal to Amazon, they want to take a look at what's going on in your skill. They'll ask for your skill ID. This is where you get it, right here. All right, so ignore most of that. The things you're going to change most often are the things under skill package and under Lambda. Under skill package, we have the skill deployment manifest. Now, for the most part, it's just telling where all these different endpoints are, all the ARNs for the different endpoints in AWS Lambda. You're probably not going to change those either. Down here, you have some publishing information like the name. And later, when you get around to actually publishing your skill live, and I'll talk about what the difference is between deploying and publishing here in a second. But when you get around to publishing it, you might come in here and fill out a whole bunch of information. But initially, you're going to ignore this file. You're just not going to mess with it. The one place as a developer you might mess with it is if you're wanting to add permissions. Like, for example, I spoke last week at CodeMash about location aware skills. If I wanted to, in order to know where the user is, you have to ask permission from the user. It's just not going to give you that information out of the box. It has to ask for permission. And so to give it permission, you have to come in here and do something like this. I have some snippets in my VS Code that make it possible for me to do that without having to remember anything. But basically, I've just added a permission for geolocation. Now, this is telling it that the skill is able to ask for that permission, but it still doesn't have the permission until the user grants it. Now, I'm not going to leave that in here because we're not doing any of that tonight. But just know that's kind of what the skill manifest is for. We'll close a few of these things, and we'll go to the interaction model. Now, you're going to spend a lot of time in the interaction model. Now, the interaction model has three main parts. There's the language model, which is what you see starting on line 3 here. And then that's all there is in there, except if you start developing with dialogues, which again, we're not going to cover tonight, there's 2 other sections in there. There's the dialogue model, and then there's these things called prompts. And those are 2 different sections, but they're related to each other. And essentially, you're defining what the dialogue looks like, and in prompts, you're defining how you're going to ask the user for the information that they need to give you. But for now, we're just going to focus on what's available out of the box with this Hello World skill. In fact, what I should do one thing really quick. Notice this line here, it says change me. I need to change that. So I'm going to change this to home field. That's my invocation name. And before I explain what the invocation name is, I'm just going to commit my work. And the reason I want to do this right now is because while I'm talking, it can be building that model for me, and we don't have to wait on it as much. Of course, by law, the first commit you make is got to be called initial commit. And we're going to push it. And what's going to happen is, because it's an Alexa hosted skill, there's a CI server out there that's going to pick this up, and it's going to build it, and it's going to do all the work that needs to be done while I'm talking about stuff. All right, so the invocation name, what that is you can think of it as an icon. So on a desktop, you might double click an icon to open something, or if you're on your phone, you might tap an icon to open an app. Think of this as like an icon, but instead of an icon you tap on, it's an icon you talk to. So you would say something like, Alexa, open home field, or Alexa, ask home field to do something, whatever that something is. And it basically opens the Alexa app up for you to interact with. Okay, now under that, you have different intents. These are the things that a user intends to do. And some of these are built in. The ones that start off with Amazon Dot, these are built-in intents, and they handle very specific cases like, I want to get out of here, cancel, or I want some help, or stop, whatever you're doing, stop. And to some degree, stop and cancel are synonymous, but there's certain nuances to that depending on what your skill is doing. But generally speaking, they're synonymous with each other. And then there's the hello world intent. Now, also, before I talk about hello world, there's this navigate home intent. This is a weird one. I know what it does. I also don't know why it's here in this extremely simple app. Because the purpose of navigate home intent is if you have a screen-based device, it's to handle the event that would take you back to the home. And this is not a screen-based app yet. I haven't built that in. So I don't know why this would be here until I'm ready to do that, but whatever. But hello world intent. So the user wants the skill to say hello. And so what they would do is the user would say something like, ask home field to say hello, or ask home field, how are you? Or ask home field to say hi or something like that. Or they might say open home field, and the very next thing they say is say hello. And then it would trigger this intent. So the idea here is you look at these samples, these are called utterances. And the thing about humans is if I were to ask you to write down all the possible ways you could ask somebody to tell you to say hello, you could probably come up with a list a lot longer than this, because people say things differently. And there's a lot of different ways to say things. But all these sample utterances are here as a guide to the skill of the things that could be said to trigger this hello world intent. Now you also notice that I have what's it called? Copilot. I have Copilot installed, and so it's offering some suggestions for me. So, maybe I'll stop there. That's a little crazy, but you can add all you want here. But what's happening is when we build the model, the model builder is going to go in here and run a little machine learning on it, and it'll actually infer a lot of things that you didn't think of. And so that you don't have to be comprehensive. You don't have to think about everything a user might say here, but it helps. The more comprehensive you are, the more likely it's going to produce a positive hit. But even if you don't think of everything the user might say, there's at least a good chance that when it builds the model, the machine learning behind all that will figure out what some of the good things are that match up with hello. So you don't have to do everything. Slots, we're going to talk about slots here in a minute. That's basically parameters, but we don't have any parameters for hello. And then we have this thing called intent. So these are the things a user may say. This is a very precise thing we want them to do. So we've narrowed down all the things they might say into the one thing we want to have happen. And how's that handled? Well, you come over here to Lambda, and you have index.js, which has all these request handlers in them. And there's two I'm going to focus on. First off, launch request handler. This gets invoked whenever you say open, in this case, whatever the invocation name is, but in this case, it's open home field. And so what's going to happen is it's going to come to this request handler. It's going to say, okay, it's going to call the can handle. And if can handle returns true, then handle will be called. So when you say open home field, it's going to say, well, is this a launch request? If it is a launch request, then handle is going to get called. So whenever I say open home field, it is a launch request. And so this will return true, and then this will get the job. Now I'm going to change this a little bit. I'm going to have it say something like welcome to home field. You can say hello or help, or you can ask which stadium your NFL football team plays in. Now, I'm sorry that I'm hopefully this is not sensitive matter for St. Louis, since you don't have an NFL team anymore. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be mean about that. I understand you have an XFL team, so that's kind of cool. But it's just, this is the example I've created, so I'm sorry. I'll try to avoid talking about that team that plays in Los Angeles if I can. All right. And so that's what's going to happen whenever you launch the skill. Now, whenever somebody says hello, or any other potential intent that we find over in our interaction model, whenever somebody says hello or whatever, well, that's an intent request. And more specifically, the intent in question is hello world intent if they say hello. And all we're going to simply say is hello world, but let's change that a little bit so we know it's not just the built-in one. Let's just change it a tiny bit just so we can see it say something else. How about hello and welcome to home field, something like that, just to make it stand out a little bit from what the default is. Now you'll notice that both of these have this thing called reprompt on them. And this one's commented out. In fact, I'm going to delete it. But what reprompt does is if you don't have it, such as we have now with the hello world intent handler, if you don't have that, it's just simply going to say this, and then the session's going to end. Nothing else will happen. But if you have reprompt, it's going to say whatever you say in here. Now, in this case, it's saying the same thing that it said the first time. But you could have it say something else if you want. But it's going to say something, and then it's going to leave the microphone open, because the idea here is you ask a question and you're expecting the user to come back and say something. And in fact, there's a rule about that as a developer, you can do whatever you want, but when you get around to publishing your skill, it's going to go through a suite of tests. And one of the things it's going to check for is if you have a reprompt, but you didn't end with a question. because that's confusing to the user. It's at least confusing. It's potentially a security concern where you leave the microphone open. The user thinks that you're done. You left the microphone open. Now it's listening to stuff. And your skill will not be certified if you do things like that. If you don't ask a question, but you leave the mic open, Amazon, believe it or not, is very, very, very interested and they're committed to security. As some, some people say, yeah, but I don't want to have a device that's listening to me all the time. And I don't want to talk about that tonight, other than say that, believe me, there's a lot of things I wish I could do, honest things I wish I could do, but because they could be used dishonestly, Amazon has locked them down. There's things you just can't do because there are bad people out there. So Amazon's very interested in security, and one of the very basic things they do is you can't have a reprompt if you didn't end with a question. All right, so I made those changes. Now I've got all these other intent handlers. There's one for help, and there's one for cancel and stop, and there's a fallback. This is here mostly for debugging, but or actually it's not. This is not the one for debugging. I misspoke. This is one where if it doesn't understand anything you said, if you said something that just simply did not match up with an intent, fallback is going to get the job. And the idea is you don't want to leave them hanging, and so you say, "I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. Maybe ask again." Now, this is a case where they sort of broke their own rule. They did not end in a question, and yet they are reprompting. I don't want to talk about that. That's I always go and change this anyway. I changed it so it does have a question, but why Amazon did that with their own template, I have no idea. They have their own rules and they broke them. All right, so then you got a session ended request handler. So if the session does end, you could do some any sort of cleanup you want to do here. This is the one I was thinking about for debugging, is the intent reflector handler. So if by chance you find some intent over here, but you don't have a handler for it over here, then this is the fallback. And you can see how it works. It checks to see if there's an intent request, but it doesn't check to see what the intent name is. So all these other ones have a chance to check for an intent name. This one is just simply checking, okay, if none of the other ones handle it, but it is still an intent request, then this is a little debug that says, hey, you just triggered this. Which, by the way, as you're working with this, if you ever heard that phrase, you just triggered whatever the intent is, well, that's because you defined it in the interaction model, but your implementation just doesn't support it yet. But then you have this error handler. If things go wrong, if any exceptions are thrown out of any of your handlers, this will get called. And then you're wondering, okay, well, how does it know, what order does it consider these in? And that's decided down here. You create this skill builder, you say Alexa skill builder, and you add all your request handlers, you add your error handlers. This right here is hardly useful at all, but it's in there anyway. And then this Lambda function, that's a builder function that builds the bigger handler for the entire skill. But then you have all these request handlers. And these are the request when it comes in is given to these in this order. So launch requests is going to get first crack at it. Hello world's going to get next chance. Help, cancel and stop, fallback. And notice intent reflector handler is at the very end. If I were to move that to the top of this list, if I moved it up here on line 145, then nothing would work. That would be the only thing that works. So this is the order that everything is in. All right. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do one of the, since I made a few changes, the good news is I've already deployed this one time. I didn't tell you that. I mean, I did when I committed it, but we didn't try it out. But I'm going to make, I said I'm going to make some tweaks, and this is going to result in another deployment. Now, while we're waiting on that, which shouldn't take that long this time, while we're waiting on that, let me define what the difference is between deployment and publishing. Deployment means that you can deploy this thing all day long. And you can hit it, and your friends can hit it, and your family can hit it, as long as you're all using devices that are connected to the same account that your developer account is on. And so once this thing's deployed, I can actually talk to it on any Alexa device in my house, or any Alexa device that I carry with me that's connected to my Amazon developer account. However, none of you can try it, and none of my friends down the street can try it, and no family members outside of my house can try it, because none of their Alexa devices are connected to my developer account. But any device in my house, any real device, an Echo Dot, Echo Show, whatever, I can use to interact with my skill that's been deployed. as long as that device is on the same account as my developer account. Publishing is a different thing. Publishing is, this is where you're making it live. You're making it available to either a set of regions, maybe just the US or US and Canada. You get to decide, what kind of regions you deploy to, potentially the world. But you get to decide where these things go. But once it's out there, whatever regions you've chosen, they can, the world can see it now, and it's live, and it's just like you published out to the cloud on the internet, and everybody can see it, see your web page. Same idea. Everybody can now talk to your Alexa skill, and the rules are different. When you're deploying, you can do pretty much whatever you want. You can break all the rules you want. There's a lot of things you can do that you can't do when you go live. And so this is kind of an important note. Even if you don't ever anticipate publishing anything live, you can develop your own skills for your own personal use all day long. And nobody can stop you. You're not going to have to pay for it. No, of course, nobody can pay you for it either. And you can break all the rules. You can have all sorts of fun with it. But once you could decide you want to share this with the world, then you have to go through a certification process. And they run it through a set of tests. There's also some human interaction with it, and they want to make sure that your skill is of reasonable quality, that you're not going to break, that you're not breaking any rules, that you're not violating any security concerns or anything like that. And typically, my experience has been publishing takes about, I usually get my response within a couple of days. In fact, most cases I've got them overnight. I do hear from other people who've had not as much good luck as I've had. It's taken them weeks sometimes to get an answer back. I don't know what they're doing wrong. I know that at least some of them are developing skills that we're targeting, or targeting is a horrible word in this case, but the audience is children, educational skills. And I think it goes through a more hefty review process when you do that. They've dropped support for HIPAA skills. Not that you can't develop HIPAA skills, it's just that Amazon is not going to help you do that. But when you could develop for HIPAA, then of course that went through a huge process as well. So those kinds of things took longer. But if you're developing something fairly simple, it's not aimed at children, it's not requiring HIPAA compliance, then you'll probably get get it published within a few days. And if you violate any rules, or if there's any concerns, then they're real good to work with you. You'll get an email back. It'll tell you what went wrong and what you need to work on, and you fix it and you try again. And they're not angry with you. They're not mean. They're nice people. I know some of them. They're just trying to make sure that both you and Alexa, the Alexa brand, are protected when you publish stuff out there. That's all. And so usually the tips they give you are actually, they're helpful. They help you build something even better than maybe you thought in the first place. All right, so this should be out there by now. So how can I test this? I've got my Echo device. It's been muted this entire time, but let's try it. Now, this is a little scary because I have not tried working with the home field skill, because I've just now published. Published is not the right word. I've just now deployed it. So hopefully it'll understand me correctly. Let's try it. Hopefully you can hear this as well. I've got the device really close to my microphone. Alexa, open home field.
Welcome to home field. You can say hello or help, or you can ask which stadium your NFL football plays in. Which would you like to try?
Hello.
Hello and welcome to field.
Somewhere in there I was talking and typing and made mistakes along the way, but obviously it's missing a few words in there. Let's go fix those real quick, because it's going to annoy me if we don't, but then we'll get on to the next thing. So it's welcome to home field. You can say hello, or you can ask which your NFL football team plays in. That was the word I missed there. And down here, hello and welcome to, that should say home field. There we go. So next time I deploy this, it'll be better. All right, so that's a start. Let's do something now. Let's add an intent that takes variable input. So it's going to look a lot like what you see here, but I'm going to not bother typing it all. I instead have snippets in here that help me with that. So you need a new intent. The name of the intent will be something like favorite color. I was going to do something a little bit more clever, but I don't want to distract from what we're trying to do here. So I'm going to say how about you do this? My favorite color is blue. Now think about what I just typed there. I said my favorite color is blue. Now, what if somebody's favorite color is yellow? Well, then I'd have to duplicate this. Or what if it was green or orange? I'd have to duplicate this. And furthermore, by the time I got the answer, by the time I got the message in my intent handler, there's this, whatever the user said is not available to me. So I won't even know what their color is. I'll just know that they triggered this intent. I won't know what their color is. A better way to do that is put a parameter in there. And thanks to Copilot, it gave me exactly what I wanted to do there. I put a little placeholder in here called color. Now, Copilot's going to be very helpful, except that it's offering something really dumb here. How about color is my favorite color? And how about, let's see if it offers something useful. My favorite color is, and my favorite animal is, oh, see, it's trying to get clever now. That's not cool. How about we do something simpler? And we say, whoops, Copilot's trying to be too clever now. Copilot's great until it isn't, and then it's no fun. How about we say, I like color. That's it. Those are our three. Now, what is color? Well, it's a slot, and we have to define what that slot is. And here, Copilot is helpful. It's telling me that the name of my slot is color, and that my type is Amazon.color. That's a custom built-in type that Amazon provides. Incidentally, let me see if I can find it for you real quick. Alexa types. This, I don't know why I don't have this page bookmarked, because I pull this up all the time. But there are several built-in types that Amazon has. There's some for dates and durations and numbers, but more specifically 4-digit numbers, because they find that 4-digit numbers are useful for things like PIN codes and whatnot. Ordinals like first, second, third, so forth, phone numbers and time. And those are great, but then you also have all these list types down here. So we have this thing called search query. Ignore that. We won't talk about that tonight. If you want to know more about it, email me and I'll tell you everything you want to know about search query, but I don't want to talk about that tonight because it's kind of an ugly one. Let's talk about list types. And there's different list types depending on what locale you're developing for, but sticking with English US, we have Amazon Actor. And it could be any, this is a set of sample values, but this is not the only 5 actors that it knows about. So if somebody were to say James Earl Jones, it's going to match to this. It can match to actor. There's different administrative areas. There's aggregate ratings. I mean, there's stuff in here. I don't even know what some of these things are. There's airlines and airports. And the kind of get to the point, there's also color. So Amazon.color is what we're going to use now. And really, these are, the first thing you might think, and this is what I thought is, oh, this is used for validation. It's to validate that what the user said actually is a color. And that's not true. I mean, you can use it that way. There is a way to make that work, especially if you're building dialogues. There's a way to make it validate against the type that you have, but that's really not what it's for. It's actually more to help the voice recognition deal with any ambiguities, or if there's somebody who's not talking clearly, or somebody has, maybe they have a sore throat, or maybe they have an accent or something. It's just to help deal with, Amazon thinks it heard yellow, but it wasn't sure. Well, is the slot a color? Okay, it's a color, therefore try to match what it thinks it heard with whatever color might sound like that. That's all it comes down to. It's there mostly just to help the voice recognition, the natural language understanding, to deal with cases where it may not have been clear what Alexa thinks it heard. Okay, that's really what it's for. So we have color. We have our favorite color intent. I'm going to save that. Our interaction model is done. We've just added an intent for favorite color intent. We've got a slot called color, and we have 3 utterances. I like to at least start off with 3, but then later on, you'll find as you develop, you'll start thinking of, maybe dozens of others. Bear in mind, again, the machine learning model, when it builds this, will come up with some for you. But I would at least offer 3 to start with, that kind of as a guide for what it's supposed to do. Now over here, we have to build our intent handler. So I'm just going to build it right down here. And guess what? I have I have some snippets in VS Code to help me with that. So I'm going to say favorite color intent handler, and that also should have filled this in for me as favorite color intent is the thing we're going to handle. If you don't mind, I'm going to bump the font down just one little bit more so I don't have to scroll around as much. And down here, I get to say whatever I want. So I'm going to say something like, okay, my favorite color is also whatever the color is. Now, I'm going to put the backticks in here because that's a JavaScript way of letting me put little variables in here. And I don't have a color defined yet. I don't have a color defined yet. So I'm going to say color equal, and again, Copilot's being very helpful here. It's using a function called get slot value. It's going to get it from the handler input from the request envelope, and it's specifically asking for what the color slot is. Now, you don't have to use this Alexa get slot value. You can actually dig around. You can go handler.input.request envelope.request.intent.slots. I mean, it gets really ugly. The get slot value is just a convenient function to help you dig down in there without digging all the way down in there. It does some of the digging for you. So this is just going to say, my favorite color is whatever you said, 2. Now, the one thing I always forget to do is I forget to register my intent handler with the skill builder. Notice that if it's kind of hard to see, but that is a little faded gray as opposed to like help intent handler, which is more of a bolder black. So I need to come down here to my skill builder and throw this in here. And it doesn't matter because there's not going to be really much of a collision between this and any of the other handlers. So where I put it in this list is really not that important. I'm just going to put it right there. Now, by the way, kind of a side note, completely unrelated to what we're talking, well, not completely unrelated, but more of a tangent for what we're talking about here. Because I always forget that. And because I'm a Spring developer and I love building controllers without having to go register them somewhere. Because if you think about it, an intent handler is roughly analogous to a controller in Spring MVC. And in Spring MVC, I just annotate it with a controller or annotate it with REST controller and magic happens. It just discovers it for me. But I always forget to do it here. When I create a new request handler, I always forget to go register it down here. I actually started a little experiment. In fact, it was a week ago today, I think is when I started it. I have an example bit of code out there that shows how to basically, it's a library that I'm building, and someday I'm going to publish it out so that if you're using NPM, you can just install it into your project. But essentially, it enables discovery of request handlers, and it even supports ordering and things like that. So you can actually just go build your request handler and forget about it. It just gets registered for you, because I'm tired of forgetting about that. But today, I'm not using that, so I have to go register it. All right, everything's in place. We have to deploy it. And so the way we deploy it is we commit it. So add favorite, color, intent, and handler. And I push. And this takes a second or two. Now, while we're waiting for this to deploy, let me show you how you might check in on the status of this. You come back over here to your developer console, and I'm going to do a refresh. And you're going to see here at the top, home field is in there. When I click on home field, there's two things that I changed. I had to change the interaction model to add the intent definition. I had to go change my code to add the handler. If you go into code, your first clue that it hasn't picked anything up yet is you get this yellow bar that says the master branch is ahead of the dev version. That means that CI hasn't had a chance to pick it up yet. But if I hit refresh, now you can see that yellow bar has gone away, and you see this thing over here is animated deploying. So it's busy deploying that for me. And in fact, you can see it now in the code. You can see the favorite color intent. You could actually edit your code here if you wanted to. I really don't like this editor, but you could do it here if you wanted to. Come over here to build and go to, once it's here, go to interaction model, maybe intents. And you can see it hasn't picked up the favorite color intent yet. And that's because it doesn't pick up the interaction model until after it's deployed the Lambda. So there's a little bit of a lag in there between that. So if I just keep refreshing this though, well, now you see favorite colors there, and also you see quick build successful. It actually does 2 passes of the build. It does a very simple build called quick build that just, long and short, there's more to it than this, but long and short of it is the quick build only enables whatever utterances you provided. It doesn't do any of that extra machine learning stuff to help build out a more rich set of utterances. But then the final build is complete now, and now I can test it. So let's give that a shot. I'm going to use it on my device here. Alexa, open home field.
Welcome to home field. You can say hello or help, or you can ask which stadium your NFL football team plays in. Which would you like to try?
My favorite color is yellow.
My favorite color is also yellow.
See, it worked. It picked up that slot and pumped it in there. Whatever I said yellow, so it said it was yellow too. If I said it was blue, it would have said blue. So that's how you do, oops, where's it at? That's how you do slots, is you pull the slot out in your handler by using Alexa get slot value. And in your intent definition, you define it with whatever slots you want. You can actually have multiple slots in here. I only have the color slot in here, but you could have multiple slots in an utterance. And when you start building things like dialogues, you could actually have different utterances that have different types of slots in there. For example, you might have an utterance that doesn't have any slots. That's something like, I want to book a trip, doesn't have any slots in it. And then the dialogue will come back and ask for things like, where do you want to go? What's your destination? When do you want to leave? When do you want to come back? Or you could say, I want to book a trip to Paris. Well, then what that means is you have an utterance that says, I want to book a trip to, and it has a slot for city. But then the dialogue will come back and ask you for things like your departure and return dates. Or you could even have in there slots that have the dates in them. So you could actually have the user say everything. And dialogues are really cool that way. I wish I had more time. I could probably spend an entire hour and a half or 2 hours talking about all the ins and outs of dialogues, but we just don't have that kind of time. So, and again, conversations is even better than dialogues. It's a little bit more complicated, but it's a much richer model than dialogues because it actually builds your dialogue for you based on some sample scripts. It uses AI to build out what the dialogue should look like. All right. With that said, let's get to the point. Let's get to the thing I said I was going to do. And that is, we're going to find out what team or what stadiums NFL teams play in. And to do that, to start off with, I need to show you this Spring app I wrote. Now, I've used this example in some other stuff. In fact, you're going to see things in here that have nothing to do with what we're doing tonight. We're just going to conveniently ignore that because I used this same example a few weeks ago when I created a video for dealing with Spring 6 problem details. So this is exact same thing. I have a mono database running that I hope it's still running, that I started up. It's running in Docker right now. This app is using that database. And if I start it up, just to show you what it does, let's see if I can get a window here to work in. Bump up the font a little bit. And I'm going to use HTTP-IE. If you've never used HTTP-IE, it's a great little HTTP client, command line client. It's like curl, but way better. I'm going to go to port 8080. It assumes localhost if you don't tell it otherwise. I'm going to go to, first off, I have an endpoint called stadiums. And it lists out all of my stadiums. Or, where'd my window go? Or I can say, HTTP 8080/teams/Broncos/stadium. And it's going to tell me that Broncos play at Empower Field at Mile High. It tells me what the surface is, that it's Kentucky bluegrass. Tells me what teams play there. If I were to pick a certain stadium that's in Los Angeles, it would actually show me that 2 teams play there. But I'm not going to do that for you tonight. I'm going to leave that as a mystery for you. But that's my API, and my API is defined really simply using Spring MVC. I've got a REST controller here that handles requests that are rooted at teams. I have a placeholder for the team name. /stadium. It plugs that team name into a stadium repo find by team, ignoring the case. The actual repository is here, where I've defined find by team, ignore case. If you're not familiar with Spring Data, that's something you should check into. But if you are familiar with Spring Data, you recognize that this is the entirety of my repository, that this will be implemented for me when the application starts up. There is no implementation in my code for this. I look at the type hierarchy, you see that Stadium repository is the bottom of it. There's no other implementation here. But at runtime, one gets implemented for me automatically. All right, that's my API. So I got the Spring Java app running in the background. Let's push that down here. And we don't really need this window, so I'm going to shove it over here for now. And let's go add that question, that intent to handle the question about what stadium a team plays in. So how about we say, we call it Team Stadium Intent. That's a fine name. We can call it whatever we want, but that's a good name. And maybe we say, what stadium does team play in? Or where does team play? Or where is teams? That's probably a bad example because I have to deal with apostrophes, and I'm not sure that. Honestly, I don't even know how that would work. I'm not sure if that's what I would do or not. I got to be honest, I just simply don't know. So I'm going to change the wording of that one. What is the home field for team? How about we do that? And we'll call that good. Again, I would probably bake up more than 3 if I were intending to go to production with this, but for development purposes, 3 is more than enough. All right, so I got the Team Stadium intent defined. I need to put a slot in here. So we're gonna have a slot called team, and we have a type called team. Now, the thing is, I am pretty sure, I could be wrong about this, but I am pretty sure that Amazon does not have well, they might. Yeah, actually, they have a sports team type. I was actually thinking I was going to have to go create my own custom type, which is something we could do. You can build a custom type. It comes down here under types, and maybe you have, it looks a little like this. You give it a name, you give it an array of values along with some synonyms for that team if you want. But maybe what I do is I just, unless for some reason this one doesn't work for me, maybe what I do is I just use the built-in one. So team, but I can't use that. That's not the name. The name is Amazon.sportsteam. I wasn't expecting that. It's always amazing when I go in here and I find that it has a type for me that I didn't think it did. Incidentally, in my book, I deal with planets in the solar system, and there is not a planets type unless somebody's added one in the last year. There's not a planets type, so I had to create a custom type for planets. And yes, I'm old school, so Pluto is in that list. All right, let's give this a shot and see what happens. Over here, I have to create the handler for it. So I call it not favorite team handler, but well, let's not type all that. Let's say intent handler. We're going to call it Team Stadium Intent Handler, because if I remember right, that's the name of the intent. Team Stadium Intent. Team Stadium Intent. That's the handler for it. I'm going to go get that slot out into the team variable, just like Copilot suggested that I do. That looks correct. And then I'm going to do something stupid just to start off. I want to make sure that we're getting this much of it right. And we're going to say, I do not know where they play. We're just going to say that. And the reason I want to stop here and before we do anything real with it and use the real API is I want to make sure I didn't screw something up in the creation of this intent. So let's go ahead and register this down here. And we should be ready to go, ready to roll. All right, push it. And I guess while we're waiting, I got a couple of seconds here. While we wait, probably about a minute or so while we're waiting for this to be picked up and deployed. Does anybody have any questions? Now's a good time to ask in the chat. If not, that's fine. Just see if it's picked this up. It hasn't picked it up in the model yet, maybe the code. And again, my experience has always been that when people are watching me, this takes a billion times longer. Usually it happens a lot faster. So we got a question here. So what are the options for authentication and authorization for personalized responses? That's a good question. If you're talking about knowing who the user is, there's a couple of options there. There's actually three, and you can even combine them to a certain degree. They can provide you with a PIN code. That's one way. That's kind of an awkward way, but it can be done. There's a way that it can recognize a voice. So most Alexa devices are capable of recognizing a user's voice, even if they've not, they may not be setting it up to do that, but if they have set it up to do that, where in fact, most of the devices in my home know my voice, and they also know my youngest daughter's voice. And so if we speak to it, it knows it's talking to us and not somebody else. Also, if you have some of the more modern Echo Show devices, they have cameras on them. Now, I have an Echo Show 5 here, or no, Echo Show 8 here at my desk. It has a camera on it, but it does not support what I'm about to say. As far as I know, only the Echo Show 10 and the Echo Show 15 support facial recognition. So if the camera's on, if you haven't blocked it off, most of the devices have a built-in little blocker. So if you don't want the camera on, you can block it. But otherwise, I mean, I'm here in my office, but I'm looking out through a door in the hallway, and I have a Echo Show 15 on the wall. If I walk up to that right now, it'll say, "Hi, Craig." It knows that I'm there. It just recognizes my face. And so as a consequence of that, my skill can also take advantage of that information and do that. So you can use any of those three or all three together, and it'll know who the user is. You can also do things like more richer security if you want with some sort of backend system. So you can do, essentially it's an OAuth flow, and it's something called, what's it called? Account linking, that's what it's called. And with account linking, what happens is they don't authenticate on your skill, they authenticate to some other application. And that other application verifies that it is in fact you, and then it tells the skill who you are. And so there's a way to do account linking. I'm not going to cover that tonight. It's actually something I'd like to have covered, but it's a little bit more complicated and a little bit more, let's just say I'm going to make a lot more mistakes. Let's just say that if I tried to do it in front of people. I usually have to consult with a cheat sheet to remember everything I have to do to make that work. But if I did authenticate with some backend system, including one of the more common choices people use for that, even if you don't have a backend system you want to authenticate with, but you still want to have that kind of authentication, there's a thing called login with Amazon, or LWA for short, and you can do login with Amazon as a means of authentication as well. So yeah, it's a good question. Have you thought of doing YouTube lives teaching this? Yeah, the scary thing is I don't mind doing like user groups like this, but doing frequent lives, yeah, scares me a little bit. I've created several videos and I've published out there, and I'm planning on doing a whole bunch more. In fact, I have like 4 or 5 videos right now that are sort of in the can being edited. But that's the thing, is I like to kind of put a little polish on it and take out some of the mistakes I make if I can, just to avoid that. I mean, I sometimes leave a few mistakes in there where the mistake is educational, but if it's a mistake where it's just completely, I just boffed it up somehow, I like to take that out when I edit it. Ted says, I am surprised that there is not a calculator skill. I'm surprised that there is not either. I bet you there is. But where do you go to find a list of published skills that you can use on your Echo device? Another good question. When you install your Echo device, you have to install it using your phone, or at least I think you can do it on a tablet as well. There's an app called it's the Alexa app, and it's commonly referred to as the what's it called? The companion application. And there's a couple ways you can do this, but in the companion app, in the Alexa app, there is essentially a skill store, and you can go search through that. The companion app also is available on the web. Unfortunately, for reasons that are very unclear to me and a whole bunch of other developers who have asked about it, the web version of the companion app does not have a skill store. It does not show a list of skills. It used to, but then it went away, and nobody has been able to tell us why. It's kind of frustrating. You could go in the browser and see those. Another way to find them is just search on Amazon. Go to Amazon.com, go set your restrictions or whatever the filter is from, instead of the entirety of Amazon.com, select Alexa skills and then search for whatever you want. And maybe that'll help you. Another way, if it's something specific that if I was building a skill and I wanted to market it and I wanted to promote it, I can go put a link on a web page or in a Twitter tweet or something like that with a link to my skill. And when they click on it, it actually takes them to a page where they can actually launch from a web page. They can launch the skill on whatever Alexa device that they have associated with their account. And it's called quick links that's available to do that. In fact, if you go to habuma.com and you scroll down to where I show a few of my skills, there's a link there. There's quick links for some of my skills on there that will, you click on it and it'll show you a page where you basically say, yes, I want to launch it on this device in my house, and it'll launch on that device. It's kind of cool. So is there any intent or percentage match for noisy or muffled input? So basically, I think what you're getting at here is the fallback intent. So yeah, the fallback intent, if you don't have a fallback intent, then it's going to basically match almost anything that comes that's even close. In fact, if you don't have a fallback intent, then the word watermelon will match hello. If you don't have a fallback intent and you don't have any other intents, zebra will match hello. Even though it sounds nothing like hello, it'll still match because nothing else matches. Why not? But as soon as you put a fallback intent in there, which is actually a good thing to have, whether you like what I'm about to say or not, if once you have a fallback intent in there, then it starts getting a little fuzzier. And so if the user says something that's not clear or isn't correct, or maybe there's a noisy environment and Alexa didn't hear them correctly, and it couldn't match it to an intent, then the fallback intent will get the job. But there is a means by which you can set the sensitivity of the fallback intent. And in fact, I've had a problem with one of my skills where, for whatever reason, I haven't figured out why yet, but very clearly I'm saying exactly what my utterance says I should say, but it goes to a completely different intent, because it has something to do with the fallback intent sensitivity. So I went and tweaked the fallback intent and sensitivity, and everything started working again. I'm probably doing the wrong thing there, but it works. So I'm going to have to figure that out some more. And I need to go ask about that in the Slack channel. I just never was a priority for me to deal with it, so I haven't. But as far as noisy and muffled inputs, the good news is that most of the devices out there have really good microphones on them. You know, what I can't remember what the word is, but basically good microphones. They can hear things through some noise for the most part. They're pretty good at it. And in fact, I've recently got a product called TalkSocket, which is a very tiny, you probably can't see it, but it's going to probably get filtered out. But I have this little tiny device that I put on the back of my phone. It looks like a pop socket, and I can talk to Alexa that way. And the reason it's taken me so long to finally get it is because it had to go through a series of tests at Amazon. And one of those tests, or at least some of those tests, maybe not just one, but some of those tests involved testing it in a noisy environment to see how good it was, to see if it could actually hear what was being said, even if it's a noisy environment. And even though I haven't tried this with the TalkSocket yet, I have tried it with just the microphone on my phone. And I've tried this in a noisy environment. And I can't think of too many environments that are noisier than being in Disneyland. And I've tried it there, and it understood me better than I could understand the response back, because the speaker on my phone wasn't loud enough for me to hear over the crowd, but Alexa heard me just fine. So there's that. And then last question, and I'll go ahead and test what we just did. Is there syntax to form speak output tonals to emphasize a word over others? And I'm not going to read the rest of that, but I think I'm getting what you're saying here is, yes, there's actually something really cool called SSML. It's the speech synthesis markup language, and it's supported by not just Alexa, it's supported by other voice devices. In fact, I think even Siri supports it to some degree, to where, at least in so much as developing for Siri is supported. And SSML allows you to do all kinds of things with it. You can have her emphasize words. You can have her speak like she's depressed. You can have her speak like she's super happy. You can have her even speak in a completely different voice if you wanted to. There's other voices that you can substitute in there. There's you can have her there. In fact, some of the voices are like different languages, so you can pick maybe a Spanish speaker. Enrique, the name of the voice in Spanish, there's Enrique and gosh, I can't remember what the female voice is, but they speak with a Spanish accent. Or there's Russell is one of them that I remember that has a Australian accent, and Brian has a British accent, and they speak with an accent. It's kind of cool. And in fact, if you set the language in your SSML, if you specify specific locale, it'll even say things idiomatic for that language. So what's the word route is pronounced differently depending on which locale you're in. And if you pick depending on the language chosen, it'll pronounce it differently. You can also do things like you can actually provide pronunciation guidance to help it say things the way you want it to be said. And an example of that is I have a skill I've created for No Fluff Just Stuff called, well, it's called No Fluff Just Stuff. But one of the things it does is it speaks this, it tells you who the speakers are at any given event. And I can't remember exactly how she says it, but she says Venkat Subramaniam very incorrect. She says Subramaniam in a very weird way. And I haven't changed the skill. So if you were to go try it out, she would probably say it the wrong way. But I have tinkered with it a little bit, and there is a way to make it say the name the same way that Venkat says it. So that's kind of cool. But yeah, there's a lot of things you can do with that. There's also something called there's a thing called the Alexa presentation language for audio. There's two things, APL and APLA. The Alexa presentation language, but the A one is for audio, and it allows you to do all sorts of mixing of sounds. So you can have background sounds, you can have like a soundtrack in the background or some sort of sound effects in the background while she's talking. There's all sorts of cool things you can do there. And I guess I will answer one more. Is there an initial recurring fee charged by Amazon to publish your skill? Absolutely not. Doesn't cost you a dime to publish a skill. In fact, I know some very successful skill publishers who still aren't paying anything. Their skill is very successful, but it still falls under that free level. And so they're doing pretty good and haven't paid a dime for it. I assume that some things like sleep sounds I assume Nick Schwab has to pay a bill. I assume he's exceeded that free level, but I know some other people who have very successful skills and still haven't exceeded the free level. It doesn't cost you a dime to do this. All right, so we should be able to try this out now. We've talked long enough. I'm going to refresh this, and that yellow bar should go away, and it should say it deployed it about 10 minutes ago. We spent a long time talking, didn't we? I'm going to go down to build, and it should have deployed my model, my interaction model. I should be able to see in here my Team Stadium intent. Let's give this a shot. But instead of testing it with my device, I'm going to show you another way to test it. I mean, I could test it with my device, but I can also go to test right here. And in test, I can say things like open. I'm going to turn my volume up. It'll speak, but you can also read it. Open home field.
Welcome to home field. You can say hello or help, or you can ask which stadium your NFL football team plays in. Which would you like to try?
And also, if I wanted to, I could hold down the microphone here and I could say, where do the Cowboys play?
Hello and welcome to home field.
For some reason, it matched the wrong intent. Let's try it more specifically. Let's open that Mac up.
Welcome to home field. You can say hello or help, or you can ask which stadium your NFL football team plays in. Which would you like to try?
So I'm going to type it. Which stadium do the Titans play?
I do not know where the Titans play.
So there you go. The Titans it doesn't know that, but it knows it picked up the slide, it said it, and it's because it hasn't fed that back to the thing yet. Now I'm a little curious about the request because I am wondering if it understood me at all, because I am using that Teams, that built-in sports team, and I'm not using my own slot. So down here you can see the request, and you can see that the team Titans confirmation status is none. And basically what it's saying is it didn't understand me. It heard what I said, but it didn't recognize that as a valid team. Let's try one more time. I'm going to shortcut it. I'm going to say ask home field. Now let me match it perfectly. Let's make sure I get my slot perfectly, even though you shouldn't have to. I just want to make sure that there's nothing else could go wrong. Where does, I should probably come up with a better utterance, but where does Cowboys play? It's not really proper English, but.
I do not know where the Cowboys play.
Now, notice I didn't say the Cowboys. I just said Cowboys. So it at least sorted out that it may be working right. I'm a little puzzled by this. I was actually expecting more in there. I tell you what, let's go ahead and create a custom type while we do the next thing. In the next part of the next step in this, I just want to call out to the service. And so let's add a custom type in there to make sure that we're getting this right. So I'm going to call this football team. I'm going to say type football team. And I'm not going to create the entire NFL in here. I'm just going to throw a few values in here. I'm going to put in Cowboys. We'll say Cowboys. We'll say Dallas is a synonym. So if I said, where do Dallas play? That's going to still match the Cowboys. So Dallas Cowboys also will match. And maybe we'll throw a couple other in here. I am still avoiding that team that plays in LA. How about I'm going to spell it out for reasons that are, well, no, I won't do it. I'll do, this should work. 49ers. What's it going to suggest? I'm just curious. Is it, yep. Copilot was awesome that way. It actually suggested San Francisco. Copilot knew exactly what I was talking about. If anybody's not using Copilot, you should try it. Like I said, it usually is helpful, not always. And let's try one more team. Let's see. How about Vikings? So one of these is its ID. This is just a unique ID. This could actually, doesn't even have to be a word. This ID could be something maybe like a database primary key or something if you want. It doesn't even have to be anything real. This is the value that you're looking for, but then there's synonyms for it. So how about Minnesota? And Minnesota Vikings. Okay, we have Cowboys, Vikings, and 49ers. See if that works. All right, so I've done that. I've made that small change. Let's come back up here. Let's actually call out to the service. And to call out to the service, I'm going to add a library. I'm going to say npm. This is how you install libraries in Node, npm, and I'm going to give it a prefix because the actual code is in Lambda. It's not in the root of the project. So I'm going to tell it in the Lambda directory, add this project, and we're going to call it Axios. Now there's several different libraries. Oops, what did I do? npm install. I forgot to tell it to install. My bad. So install. There's several different libraries you could use here. The Axios is the one I prefer. There's also one called Fetch. There's one called Request. There's several different HTTP client libraries you can use. I'm a big fan of Axios though, because it's really nice and concise. And so I'm going to say, oops, that's not where I wanted it. Right up here at the top, I'm going to say const Axios equal require Axios.default. What this is default is give me a default Axios client to work with. Down here, I'm going to say const response equal await Axios. So we'll talk about this await here in a minute, but right now I'm just saying Axios get. What I'm going to get, well, a whole bunch of stuff here that's not what I want. What I want to do is I want to go to localhost 8080 slash teams slash something slash stadium, and I need to put the backticks on that so I can do this. There we go. So the backticks let me put that variable in there, and now I just need to figure out what the team is and put it in there. But before I do that, this is an asynchronous request, so I'm going to say await. This is essentially a JavaScript shortcut for dealing with promises, or yeah, with promises. So I don't have to deal with promises directly. I can just say await. But if I'm going to have an await, then I have to make this function an async. That's what makes that error go away. Down here, I'm going to say something like, okay, const data equal response dot data, and then const stadium equal data dot, it's not stadium, it's data dot name, because that's the name of the value. And then I can say, why am I doing this in the launch request? Sorry, I apologize. I got ahead of myself there. I don't need a sync on that. I need it here. Async. So we're going to get the team out of there. We're going to pump the team into that request. We're going to say the team, we're going to take that out. Instead, we're going to say the team, whatever the team name is, they play at, so the Cowboys play at whatever the stadium is. I think that's what we want to do. I think that's good. I'm just taking a quick look over it, see if there's anything out of place here, but I think we're okay here. Now, what I could do here, in fact, what I will do, is I could commit this. And this is going to deploy it, and it's going to do everything it normally does when I deploy it, but I'm not going to run it this way. And the reason is, if I try to ask it this, this is going to be deployed out in AWS Lambda, and it's going to try to make a GET request to localhost 8080. Well, that's not going to work because my API is not running on Lambda. It's not running on localhost 8080. So we have a problem. How am I going to test this? Well, I have another option. I could deploy my API out somewhere. Maybe I deploy it out in Cloud Foundry, or I deploy it on some other host out there, and I change my request here to reference whatever server it's on, whatever that service is. But that's a lot of work right now. I'm still developing it. I don't necessarily want to publish my API just now. Now, if the API was already out there, sure, we're good. We're golden. I could just start using it directly, but I'm still developing this. I'm not sure I want to publish it just yet. So what can I do? Well, I'm going to show you another trick. So this is deploying. And in fact, I went ahead and did that because this trick I'm about to show you will help me with this problem, but in no way does it help me with deploying changes to my interaction model. So I'm going to say npm, I'm going to add something new, npm install prefix lambda, just like I did before, ask SDK local debug. And then this is not something I want to deploy, so I'm going to just have it save it as a dev dependency. All right, now because I've done that, you see this local debugger file that's here in that the template, when I created my project, it's been sitting here all along and I've just been conveniently ignoring it. If you read the documentation in here, you can see that it's been deprecated. I don't know why they haven't just removed it. I haven't used this script in at least a year, maybe 2 years. And even when I did use it, it was a huge pain in the butt to use. I really hate using it. In fact, they're recommending doing what I just did. They're asking that you use ask SDK local debug. So I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of this because this is just simply not doing anybody any good. Make it go away. And instead, what I can do is this. I can say ask run. Now I could stop here, and it would do what I'm about to do just fine. But if I made a mistake or if I want to make some changes, I want it to pick up and restart. So -- watch watches for changes. So we're going to run that. It's going to tell me that the session has started. The session is going to last for about an hour. And now if I come up here, I can say open home field.
Welcome to home field. You can say hello or help, or you can ask which stadium your NFL football team plays in. Which would you like to try?
Ask it where the Cowboys play.
There was a problem with the requested skills response.
Oh, great. See, I got an error. That's awesome. I don't know what their error is, but because we're actually, I know exactly what the error is because I recognize this message right here. This is telling me that something is not right. Remember I talked about SSML, and even though I'm not using SSML, everything you return in the speech output gets wrapped in a very basic SSML wrapper, and I'm actually breaking something. I always wonder, does anybody know what that might be? I'll throw it on the screen here, but if somebody can answer in the chat what might be going wrong here. Teams, Cowboys, stadium. No, it's not the apostrophe. They play an AT&T stadium. See the problem? The ampersand is the problem. Yeah, I encountered this earlier when I was tinkering with this, make sure it was working. So yeah, I'm gonna fix that. Now there's some actually really good libraries out there that help you deal with HTML escaping. And I would recommend you use those. But for my purposes, I know I can just do this. I replace ampersand with that. Well, I didn't want a semicolon. I still want a semicolon there. So that ought to do. Now notice I'm hitting save. I'm going to come back over here and my session just restarted. That's what the -- watch does for me. Let's go try it again. How about we say ask home field, where do the Cowboys play?
The Cowboys play at AT&T Stadium.
Awesome, it worked. How about we do it one more time? Ask home field, where do the 49ers play?
Sorry, I had trouble doing what you asked. Please try again.
Now, I could go try to figure this out. I'm willing to wager that I did something goofy because I used 49ers instead of spelling out 49ers. We're not going to worry about it. Let's try one more time because I know it worked for Cowboys. I was actually kind of expecting something to not quite go right with 49ers. I can figure it out, but in the interest of time, we're going to skip it. Where do the Vikings play? Now, if this fails, I don't know.
The Vikings play at US Bank Stadium.
Isn't that awesome? So it works. So it's something special about the 49ers. I screwed up. In fact, I am kind of curious now. Where do the 49ers play? I mean, I know, but what's the answer we get here? They play it. Yeah, that now we have the apostrophe. So now the Levi Stadium, that's an apostrophe problem. I would need to fix that, but we're not going to right now. We're just going to leave it alone. All right. So far, so good. That's working. And it's only working because my API is running locally because I'm doing this. I'm running my skill locally. Now, what's happening when I do this is my request is still going out to the cloud. It's still going out to Amazon. It's still being bounced against the interaction model that I deployed and built in the cloud. But when it gets that request, it turns around and directs it back to my local machine. If I stop this right now, and I come back over here and do this again, I can just simply say open home field. Maybe I just refresh this, open home field. It's not going to work.
Welcome to home field. You can say hello or help, or you can ask which stadium your NFL football team plays in. Which
So,
would you like to try?
so we haven't triggered the part where it calls the API, but we're about to, and this is where it's going to go bad.
Sorry, I had trouble doing what you asked. Please try again.
Now, obviously, I'm not running it locally. It can't hit localhost. If I was curious, if I still wasn't sure what was going on, one of the things I can do is I can go over here and to the code tab and go to CloudWatch logs. And once the CloudWatch logs are loaded, notice I've actually deployed this thing 4 times. I can go in here and I can see that an error was handled, and it's going to tell me all the details about the error. It's basically, in this case, Axios is complaining that it wasn't able to connect to 127.0.0.1. It wasn't able to connect to localhost. So that's why it broke. So that was not surprising at all because I don't have that service out there. That's why I would continue developing locally as much as I can until I'm ready to go live. And then I would deploy this and my API out there. But wait a minute. What if I don't want to run my real API? What if I want to fake it out for the purposes of maybe an automated test? So this is the last thing I'm going to do before I wrap it up. I'm going to create some tests. And there's 2 things I'm going to do. And I'm going to hope I get this right. I have a cheat sheet over here that I haven't even looked at all night. I've got this far without looking at it, but I'm going to look at it now because if I don't, I am going to get this wrong. Where's my link? It's right there. All right. So I'm going to install a nifty little testing tool. There's several different testing tools out there you can choose. There's a company called Bespoken that has some great testing tools. In fact, in my book, I cover one of their tools called BST. And I like BST a lot, but I've started to really enjoy working with another one called Ask SDK Test, which I also cover in the book. But I've actually started liking it more lately. So I'm going to say npm install prefix lambda. We still have to do that. And I'm going to install, hopefully I get this right, Ask SDK Test. It's based on Mocha and Chai, so I have to install those as well. And then I have to say save dev because I don't want this to be deployed, these libraries to be deployed when I deploy my app. So cool. Those are there. There's some vulnerabilities, probably something I should be concerned about, but I'm not going to worry myself about it right now. I just know that they're all in there and we're ready to go. And I'm going to write a test. Under Lambda, I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call it test. And in test, I'm going to create a new file called, we'll call it stadium test.js. And I've got a neat little snippet here that's going to help me with that. So ask SDK test. It's going to fill in most of the blanks here. And in fact, it's going to handle the hello world and the welcome skill, the launch request. In fact, if I do nothing else, I can try this out now. Well, almost. There's one other thing I need to do. I need to come over to package.json. This is where essentially it's equivalent to like a Maven or a Gradle build file, but for Node. But one of the things it has in there is these scripts for test. And by default, if I were to come back to my command line, go into Lambda and say npm test, it's going to tell me there's no test specified. I can't do that. That's what this says, no test specified. So I'm going to change that to run Mocha instead. There, now we're ready to go. So now if I run it, my test will run. My test is going to fail because you'll recall I changed my messages from the default to what it was, but let's just see them fail first. That's always good to see. And you can see I had 2 tests. They both failed because they didn't match. Of course, it's easy to fix. Let's go change, just copy the value in here. Change that one. And how about this? Expected, no, not that. Yeah, that's what I want. Copy all of that into this. There, now they should match, they should pass. Oops. Well, one of them passed. The hello world intent passed, the other one did not. I made a mistake somewhere. I'll tell you what, let's go to the source of this. I probably copied too much or not enough. Let's go to the source. By the way, this is not how I recommend you write tests, by the way. Just it's a good way to kind of get this going. Let's try it. All right, they're both passing. Everything's good. Let's add another test now. So I'm going to say describe. We're going to call this team stadium test or intent. And give it a function. That's all good. I'm just kind of making sure that it's doing everything I wanted it to do here. Don't need that. I think Copilot got a little bit ahead of me here. So team stadium intent. I just want to verify that is what I called it, right? Yes, team stadium intent. So I want you to invoke the team stadium intent. And let's see. I'll be honest with you, I totally forgot. I'm totally blanking on how you add parameters into this. Think with slot. That's right. I totally blanked on that for just a minute, but with slot, and the slot takes a name, team, and it's defaulting to Patriots, but I know, well, that's okay. It doesn't have to even Patriots. We haven't got that supported yet, but that's okay because for our test, we're not even going to hit the real API anyway. And what we wanted to say, if they did say Patriots, is the Patriots play, where do the Patriots play? Let's find out. They play at, well, helps if I could type. Patriots play at Gillette Stadium. So I'm just going to copy that. By the way, off screen, I'm just hitting my API to answer that question. There we go. So that's what we expect to have happen. Great. Let's try that. That should fail, by the way, because it's going to try to hit the API. Actually, it is hitting the API. The Patriots play at Gillette Stadium to play. Something is not right. Yeah, it's I forgot a period. So that's hitting the real API. But I tell you what I'm going to do now, just to show what I wanted to show. I'm going to stop my API. That's what I thought I had already done this. That's why I was expecting it to fail a second ago. Now let's try it. No, it failed. So it had trouble doing what you're asked because it's trying to hit localhost 8080. It can't. That service is no longer running. So I'm going to do something even cooler. Watch this. npm install. Now I'm already in Lambda, so I don't have to do the prefix thing. I'm going to install something called knock and do save dev. I'm going to come back over to my code. I'm going to say const knock equal require knock. Knock is short for network mock. And what that's going to enable me to do is mock with knock. I've got a nice little snippet for that. I'm going to say knock. I'm going to hit localhost 8080 I'm going to ask for teams, Patriots Stadium. I'm going to return if that is the request that is requested. I'm going to reply with the 200 and some test data. And since I happen to have the test data on screen over here, off screen over here, I will just copy it in there. So there's the details from Foxborough Stadium and are from Foxborough, the Gillette Stadium. Now let's try it again. And I still got it. That's not what I want to do. I wanted to test, not install it again. So I still got a sorry. It's interesting. What am I doing wrong? Teams, Patriots Stadium, it's hitting the right request. You know what? That might be it, but I don't think it is. No, it's actually that was it, but it's still something wrong. Yeah, it's adapting. I forgot to do any case changing along the way in my test. My service, my API actually checks for any case. It converts it to basically ignore case, but in my mock, I'm not doing that. So basically what I've done is I've made a request that's asking for the stadium that the Patriots play in, that inside of my intent handler, that is using down here, it's using Axios to make that GET request to localhost 8080 teams, whatever the team name is, stadium. Of course, that service is not there, and there's nothing running on localhost. But what I've done is I've told Knock to say, okay, when somebody comes asking for that request, then here's what you should return. And it works. Now, by the way, Knock, not an Alexa thing, it's a node thing, and it works for pretty much, as far as I know, any HTTP client you use. It works at a lower level than any of those HTTP clients. So I'm using Axios, but it also works with Fetch or Request or any of the other ones that you might be interested in using. Now, it does return a scope. I'm not using scope, but in scope, I can do other things like check to see that, in fact, that the request did happen and that it wasn't ignored. I can do other things with scope, but I'm just ignoring it for now. So there you go. That is everything I could possibly talk about tonight in the time we have. If we had another week, I could probably talk about a whole bunch of other things, but neither you nor I have the time to do that. I'm going to check another. I see another question over here. It says, how does the development process compare to Google Assistant skills? That's a really good question too. And it's an unfortunate question you ask as well. It's very similar, at least about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. I can't remember when they did it. Google Assistant, their process for developing skills, up until then it sucked. It was, you could do it, but it took me, I kid you not, it took me around 20 minutes. If I had my head down, focused, knew exactly what I was doing, it would take me about 20 minutes just to get a Hello World app out. It was such a pain in the butt. I hated it. But then Google came out with a better way of developing voice apps. And it was much easier. In fact, I could do it. It still required more work than working with Alexa, but I could still get it done within a few minutes. I could go from nothing to Hello World in just like a couple of minutes. And that was nice. I liked it a lot. The development model is very similar. They still have the concept of intents. They have the concept of utterances. I mean, a lot of the concepts are exactly the same concept. I think they call them parameters instead of slots, but more or less it's the same idea. The big difference is their intent handlers, whereas Alexa, their intent handlers are pretty flexible. Basically, if can handle returns true, this is going to handle it. And how you determine whether it's true or not is kind of up to you. You can make any decision you want inside of that can handle function. Typically, you're going to check to see if it's an intent request and that it's the team stadium intent, but you can check for other stuff as well. With Google, it's much more tied to the actual intent. It's very closely tied to the intent. So you couldn't get really off the rails there. But otherwise, it's very similar process. And they didn't have a can handle. The name of the function you create is somehow related. I can't remember. It's been a moment since I've done that, but it's related to the intent name. Now, the reason it's been a moment since I've done that is because, unfortunately, last June, Google announced that they are discontinuing custom, what they call them applications, custom assistant actions is what they call them. They were deprecating custom assistant actions for their Google Home devices or their Nest Home devices. And that was very unfortunate. Instead, they're focusing entirely on the mobile aspect for building voice support for actual mobile applications. They're basically backing up a little and doing what Apple is already doing with Siri, which is fine. I mean, I'm certainly interested in the mobile aspect of voice applications, but it's unfortunate that they decided to deprecate the building of just general voice applications for Google Assistant. And even in fact, what they're even doing then, what they're doing for their mobile device apps, it really isn't nothing more than like launching an app. If you ask the device to do that, it's very limited on what you can do. And that was announced last June, and it had a 1-year expiration date on it. So coming this June, I expect that the ability to create custom actions for Google Home is going away, and that sucks. Google Home will still be able to do like home automation stuff. It'll still be able to turn your lights on or preheat your oven or whatever you use it for in that regard. You just won't be able to build custom applications for it. And I'm quite disappointed in that. Meanwhile, Alexa hasn't done that. Alexa has just doubled down. They keep adding new things that wasn't able to get to tonight. So, and in fact, everything that you can do with Google Assistant, even after June, you can still do with Alexa. It's just Alexa does so much more, especially since you can build for these home experiences. So, and what are the good resources for learning the technology and aesthetic aspect of skills? For learning the technology, a couple of resources I would recommend. First off, there's the documentation. It is a little bit like finding a needle in a stack of needles, because there's a lot of documentation, and it's hard to sift through sometimes. You kind of have to get to know where everything is before you can find where anything is. And even I'm familiar with the documentation, and sometimes I get lost in it. Documentation is it's thorough, it's detailed, but it's hardly a place I would consider a learning from. It's more of a reference than a tutorial. There's also there are some tutorials that Amazon has published. There's one specifically called Cake Time that a lot of people recommend. I personally have not tried the Cake Time tutorial, but I hear good things about it. Of course, I can't go any further without mentioning my book, Build Talking Apps for Alexa. That's a great place to get started. I highly recommend it. And then also, as I said earlier in the talk, if you just want to ask questions of the team, go to alexa.design/Slack. And there's a Slack out there for Alexa developers. It has a lot of the Amazon team out there, as well as a lot of just folks like me out there answering questions, and people like me asking questions as well. And then finally, one other thing I would recommend, if you're really interested in this, on Tuesday mornings at 10 o'clock Mountain Time. I don't know what time that would be for everybody else, but 10 o'clock Mountain Time, on Twitch, on LinkedIn, I think it's on YouTube as well, and a few other places. A gentleman named Jeff Blankenberg does a office hours for Alexa. Now, I don't think he's going to be there this next Tuesday. He's traveling, but they're still going to have office hours. Just somebody else will be sitting in for him. But during office hours, you can ask questions about Alexa, and you can learn from there. So it's a great place to go, just to kind of, if you don't even have a question, just go anyway and listen in and see if you can learn from some of the stuff that happens. Almost every Tuesday I tune in, unless I have something else going on or a conflicting meeting. So I'm always there as well. If you do join office hours and you see the name Habuma1 on Twitch, that's me. All right. So any other questions? Otherwise, I'm done.
Okay, I think we had one. He was asking the name again for office hours.
Yeah, it's just Alexa office hours. Let me see if I can find a link for you real quick, because it's usually easy to find. It's alexa.design. Let's see. Do they have a link here? No, they don't. They make it a little bit harder on you here. How about almost every link that they create, they put something here. Maybe office hours. Yeah, that'll take you to the Twitch one. Yeah, that's where it's at. In fact, this is the one from Tuesday that if you go there right now, go to twitch.tv/Amazon Alexa, or if you just go to alexa.design/office hours, it's going to take you, and you can watch the video from the one that just took place Tuesday, as well as all the historical ones as well. And that gentleman right there with all the Funko Pops behind him, that's Jeff Blankenberg. I finally had a chance to meet him in person last week. It was he's a good guy. Anything else?
All right, well, I see there's no more questions, so I think what I'll do is I'll stop the recording and then we will go into the raffle here.